The village of Thornhollow sat at the edge of a dark forest, where the trees grew so close together that sunlight rarely touched the ground. It was a small, quiet place, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where old stories were passed down like family heirlooms. One of those stories was about the wolf. For 3 years, a wolf had lived chained behind the ruins of the old chapel at the edge of town. Nobody remembered exactly how he got there. Some said a traveling hunter had captured him and left him behind. Others whispered that he was cursed, punished by dark magic for some terrible crime in another life. The chain around his neck was thick and rusted, bolted into a stone post that had stood there for generations. The villagers avoided the chapel entirely. Children were warned never to go near it. Parents told frightening stories about the wolf's eyes, how they looked almost human, how they seemed to hold a sadness too deep for an animal to feel. 2 hunters, over the years, had tried to kill him, believing he was dangerous. Both times, the wolf had not fought back. He had simply lowered his head and waited, as though death would be easier than the life he was living. Alara Voss did not believe in curses. She was 22 years old, the granddaughter of the village healer, and she had spent her whole life caring for things other people gave up on. She nursed injured birds back to health. She fed the stray dogs that wandered through Thornhollow's streets. She sat with sick villagers through long nights when their own families had grown tired of waiting. Kindness was not something she thought about. It was simply who she was. One frosty morning, while gathering herbs near the edge of the forest, she heard a low, pained sound coming from behind the chapel. Most people would have turned and walked the other way. Alara walked toward it instead. She found the wolf lying in the mud, his ribs visible beneath his matted fur, his chain pulled taut from where he had tried, and failed, to reach a puddle of rainwater just out of range. He looked up at her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. His eyes were the strangest she had ever seen, not empty, the way an animal's eyes might be. They were full of something that looked almost like grief. "You poor thing," she whispered. She should have been afraid. Everyone told her she should be, but instead, she found herself kneeling in the mud, just out of reach of his chain, and speaking to him softly, the way she spoke to frightened animals, and frightened people alike. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I just want to help." The wolf watched her with deep suspicion, his body tense, ready to flinch away. But he did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply watched her, as if trying to understand why a human girl would kneel before a creature everyone else called a monster. She returned the next day with a small bucket of water and a bit of dried meat from her grandmother's kitchen. She placed them just close enough for him to reach, without breaking her rule of staying outside the chain's radius. He did not touch the food while she was there, but when she came back the following morning, it was gone. Day after day, she returned. She spoke to him, told him about her life, her grandmother's aching joints, the annoying rooster that woke the whole village too early, the way the leaves were beginning to turn gold at the tops of the trees. She never expected him to answer, of course. He was a wolf, but somehow, talking to him felt different than talking to anyone else in Thornhollow. He listened in a way that felt complete, without judgment, without impatience. Slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. What started as feet became inches. What started as silence became something closer to companionship. She noticed that the wolf's eyes seemed to soften whenever she arrived, that his tail would sometimes give the faintest twitch when she said his name, a name she had given him herself. "Kale," she had said one evening, watching the way the moonlight caught in his fur. "I don't know why, but that feels right for you." She did not know, of course, that the name was almost right, that somewhere beneath the fur and the chain, and the years of silence, there was a man who had once answered to a very similar name, spoken with reverence by an entire pack, that had called him their king. Kale had been the alpha king of the Nightspire pack, a proud and powerful leader among his kind, before a rival sorcerer, jealous of his influence and furious after a failed alliance, had cursed him. The curse had stripped him of his human form and bound him in the shape of a wolf, chained by magic as much as by iron, until one condition was met. He would remain trapped until someone saw him, truly saw him, stripped of power and dignity, and loved what remained anyway, without expecting anything in return. For 3 years, he had wandered, been hunted, been feared, and had slowly stopped believing the curse could ever be broken. He had begun to believe he deserved this fate, that perhaps he had been too proud as a king, too certain of his own strength, and that this was simply the price of it. And then came Alara, who knelt in the mud beside a starving, chained wolf, and spoke to him as though his life still mattered. Neither of them noticed the changes happening slowly, night after night. The chain around his neck, though still visibly rusted and heavy, grew looser each time she left him food without demanding anything in return. Each act of unearned kindness chipped away, invisibly, at the magic binding him. Alara noticed only that Kale seemed calmer, that his eyes seemed less haunted, that he had started resting his head near her feet during her visits, as close as the chain allowed. She had grown fond of him in a way she could not fully explain. She found herself looking forward to her mornings at the chapel, more than anything else in her quiet life. The villagers began to notice her frequent visits, and their whispers grew louder. Her grandmother worried for her safety, and warned her, more than once, that the wolf was dangerous, that whatever curse clung to him could just as easily curse her too. Alara only shook her head. "He's not dangerous," she said. "He's just lonely. Nobody bothered to ask what he needed. They only ever asked what he was." One night, deep into autumn, everything changed. A group of hunters arrived in Thornhollow, strangers to the village, armed and grim-faced. They claimed they had been tracking a cursed beast for years, one that had escaped a powerful sorcerer's punishment and fled into hiding. They asked questions at the tavern, described the wolf in exact detail, and within hours, they had found their way to the chapel. Alara had stayed later than usual that evening, sitting beside Kale as the stars came out, telling him quietly about a dream she'd had the night before, one she couldn't quite explain, of golden light and a man's voice calling her name. She hadn't noticed the torches approaching until it was almost too late. The hunters surrounded the chapel grounds, their flames casting long, dancing shadows across the broken stone walls. Kale rose immediately, placing himself as far in front of Alara as his chain would allow, a low warning growl rumbling from his chest, despite his exhaustion. "Step aside," the lead hunter said to Alara, his voice cold. "That creature belongs to a sorcerer, far more powerful than anyone in this village. We're here to finish what should have been done long ago." Alara's heart pounded, but she did not move. "He hasn't hurt anyone," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's been chained here for years. Whatever he did before, whoever he was, he doesn't deserve to die like this." "He's not what you think he is," the hunter warned. "Then tell me what he is," Alara shot back, stepping between the hunters and the wolf, spreading her arms wide, as though her small frame could somehow shield him from their weapons. "Because all I've seen is a creature who has been more patient and more gentle than half the people in this village." The hunters hesitated, unsettled by her fierce determination, but their leader raised his weapon anyway, unwilling to leave without completing his task. "Move," he commanded. "No," Alara said. "You'll have to go through me." It was not bravery born of foolishness. It was the purest, most selfless love the curse had been waiting 3 long years to witness, offered freely, without hesitation, without any thought of what it might cost her. The moment the words left her lips, the chain around Kale's neck shattered with a sound like breaking ice. Moonlight poured down through the broken chapel roof, wrapping around him in a column of silver light so bright that the hunters stumbled backward, shielding their eyes. Where the wolf had stood, a man now rose. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the same striking, sorrowful eyes Alara had come to know so well. Scars marked his bare arms, remnants of years spent as a hunted creature, but there was unmistakable power radiating from him now, an ancient strength that had been dormant far too long. The hunters, faced with the very sorcerer's target now fully restored to his true form, and clearly far more formidable than they had prepared for, turned and fled into the night without another word. Silence fell over the chapel grounds, broken only by the soft crackle of the abandoned torches burning out in the mud. Kale turned slowly to face Alara, his breathing unsteady, his hands trembling, as though he could not quite believe he was standing on 2 legs again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without warning, he sank to his knees before her, right there in the mud, where he had spent 3 years chained and forgotten. "You didn't save a wolf," he said, his voice rough from years of silence, but full of quiet wonder. "You saved a king who had forgotten he deserved saving. I am Kale, Alpha King of the Nightspire Pack. The curse required someone to see past everything I had become, and love what remained anyway, without asking for anything back. You did that every single day, without ever knowing what you were doing." Alara stared at him, stunned into silence, her mind struggling to catch up with everything happening around her. The wolf she had cared for, spoken to, worried over, was not simply a wolf at all. He was a man, a king, kneeling before her with an expression of gratitude so raw it brought tears to her eyes. "I didn't do it to break a curse," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did it because you needed someone. That's all." "I know," Kale said softly. "That is exactly why it worked." As dawn began to break over Thornhollow, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and rose, Kale remained kneeling before her, his head bowed, not out of duty or curse, but out of genuine reverence for the woman who had shown him a kindness he never thought he deserved. Ilara reached down and gently took his hand, pulling him back to his feet. "Kings don't kneel," she said, echoing words she hadn't known she carried until that very moment. "Not to me, beside me." He rose slowly, still holding her hand, as though letting go might undo everything that had just happened. Around them, the first light of morning spread across the ruined chapel, across the empty chain lying broken in the mud, across the beginning of a life neither of them had expected but both, somehow, already knew they wanted. In the weeks that followed, word spread quickly through Thornhollow, and beyond. The Nightspire Pack, who had spent 3 years searching in vain for their missing king, found their way to the village, and welcomed him home with a joy that shook the surrounding hills. Kale insisted, gently but firmly, that Alara come with him, not as a healer's granddaughter from a forgotten village, but as the woman who had seen him when no one else would, and who had loved him without ever expecting a crown in return. She hesitated only briefly before agreeing, her grandmother's blessing following her with tears of pride rather than worry. Ilara Voss, who had spent her whole life patching up broken things that others had given up on, became the queen of the Nightspire Pack, not because she had asked for a title or a throne, but because she had never once asked what someone was before deciding whether they deserved kindness. And Kale, the Alpha King who had once believed himself beyond saving, ruled his pack once more with the quiet wisdom of a man who had learned, in the mud behind an old chapel, that true strength was never about power at all. It was about the courage to be gentle, even when the whole world called you a monster. Together, they built something Thornhollow would speak of for generations, not as a curse broken, but as a love that had been patient enough and brave enough to wait for its moment to bloom.